I pray that they will all be one, just as you and I are one. As you are in me, Father, and I am in you, and may they be in us, so that the world will believe you sent me. What happens if you don't follow this template? What will the world do? They will not believe who Jesus really is. There's a lot at stake here. If we can't do this, the world looks at the church and goes, they look like the Democratic debate. Okay? Okay? Sorry, sometimes I'm not perfect here, just so you know. I have given them the glory you gave me so that they may be one as we are one. Finally, I am in them and you are in me. May they experience such perfect unity that the world will know that you sent me and that you love them as much as you love me. Perfect unity, what does that mean? Next slide. Okay, no, we're good, no pressure here. Perfect, there you go. So you've heard me preach on know your why a bunch of times. So defining your why, to know God and to bring all into relationship with him. Start with why, right? So we all understand that our why is to bring yourself and to bring others into a perfect relationship with God. If you start that as your why, as your motivation, if I were to draw these circles, I would draw these circles very differently. The why would be very narrow, and the how would be extremely wide. Because what we argue about is the how. And I don't care about the how. I don't care about the how. And in the what is what did we make? Did we bring people into relationship with God? Because the how doesn't matter. Let me think about some ways that we do the how. How do we bring others into relationship with Jesus? How do we grow our own relationship? What are the things? Do we go to homeless shelters? Do we work with homeless? Do we bring them into our homes? Do we go ATVing? Yeah. So each and every one of you have a different how. And it's as broad, and it should be as broad. And if we criticize people whose how is different, that's not unity. What we're talking about in unity, back one slide if you would please, is the why. This is where we have to be unified. Everything else, the how to get you to the what, doesn't matter. So stop looking at people who do the how differently and being critical. Why is someone choosing a different political party? Their perspective is different. Their how is different. That's okay. We can have hows that are different as long as the why is in unity. What are we generally arguing about when we're getting into these discussions? We're arguing about the how. You know, do you want to go into a bar and talk to people that are really in sin and bring them to the what? That's a how. The church that I grew up, if you went into a bar, you were going to hell. Anybody ever lived that one? Where are you going to find the sinners at? Yeah. Prison ministry. You know, all of these hows and some of these doctrinal differences don't matter. But yet we argue about them. Okay? And so as we go through this process, what I'm telling you is when you see somebody's how that's different than yours, assess the why, not the how. Assess the why, not the how. So next slide. And so how following my why using stories. So I like to use a lot of stories, and I don't want to run out of time here, but we're going to get close. So communicate the ideas of disagreeing politically, yet loving unconditionally, because that's the law of Christ. Do not let fear create disunity. And then pray and live the Lord's Prayer. And when I say pray and live the Lord's Prayer, yes, we live Matthew, but John 17 on unity of purpose should be our prayer. Okay? The prayer that I like to pray, so before we get into the actual content of here, so let's just bow our head. It's a simple prayer. All of you can follow this one and you can pray it every day. Heavenly Father, make us one so we can influence many. Amen. You know, this idea of fear, the two books that I recommend that you read cover to cover on this topic are obviously the Bible. Mark, I agree with you. We probably shouldn't read it cover to cover. I'm glad you picked out some really good ones because that genealogy stuff bogs me down pretty quick. Okay? But this other one, If You Can Keep It by Eric Metaxas. How many of you have read that book? Let me see your hands. So a few of us have read that. And it's such an important book. And so we're going to hit on some of those topics as well. So, you know, this idea of fear creating disunity. How do political parties get us to be on their side? Yeah, lie, or whatever. But most of it's generated through fear. Okay? Fear of either not getting something or fear of getting something you don't want. Okay? So as you hear these discussions this week and people do their platforms, ask yourself how many times do they try to generate their vote, your vote, by creating fear? It's every time. It's rare that it's anything but that. So this story, this cheetah belonged to Uday Hussein. Okay? And Uday had this cheetah ride around with him in his big BMW. And if any of you have ever heard a cheetah when they make a really loud, expressive voice, it will send chills down your spine. And so he rode around with this cheetah in the front of his car, and he would get it out when he was around folks, or Iraqis around Baghdad. And they were scared to death of him. Should you be afraid of that cat? Absolutely not. That cat would come up and lick you in the face. And you can see I'm petting him there. He's laying down. Anybody that knows animal behavior knows that he's laying in a vulnerable position because he wants me to pet him. Anybody ever see your dog or cat do that? How ferocious is that cat? Everybody's scared to death of him. Fear is a perception and rarely a reality. Now, that doesn't mean you should walk up to a cheetah in the wild and try to pet him. You will be eaten, okay? But knowing when that position is important. I mean, there are more, you know, as we relieved Uday of the need to have that cat, we placed him in the Baghdad Zoo, and more soldiers came up and got pictures with that cat than you can shake a stick at. Fear is a perspective that what does God command us about fear? But only one or two times in the Bible, right? There's such argument about how many times God or Jesus told us not to fear that I don't even know what the real number is. So it's somewhere between 200 and 365 times he tells us not to fear. So it's kind of an important tenet, right? It's kind of an important tenet. So next slide. Jesus saw this coming. He saw it coming. How much disunity gets caused by stuff like that? Are there any Christians in Colorado? Yes. Are there any Christians in, no, I can't use New Hampshire. Sorry, I'm imperfect, I admit it. The reality of it is that there are Christians all over this country that vote differently, either Republican or Democrat, than where your position may be. Is their salvation any less secure? No. It absolutely isn't. So can we have discussions about politics and about processes and policies that can be done in a fashion of unity? Can that occur? And the only way that you can do it is to be intentional about it. It's okay for someone to say, I'm voting differently than you are if their eternal why is here. Because that's in the how category, and that's wide. We can have as much how as you want, because I can tell you if you're in that how category and you're voting differently than I am, and your what is you bring people into relationship with Christ, then you did what John 17 did. You are in unity. Stop arguing about temporal type stuff. Jesus saw this coming when he said, I pray for all those people that are coming into Christianity that they have perfect unity. Okay? The disciples were very homogeneous, and then he sent them all over the world, and there is no such thing as homogeneity in Christians today. We're as different as DNA can make us. And it's because of that difference that if we do this correctly, if we have perfect unity, that we meet his directive to bring all into the understanding of his eternal position. Next slide, please. Think about my lens. Might another Christian's lens be very different? Okay? Might their politics be different? Okay? Are they in relationship with the eternal Savior? So in that picture, you have my third son shaking hands with President Obama, my fourth son shaking hands with Vice President Biden at the time, my fifth son in the Oval Office with Donald Trump, and then my oldest getting pinned on as his first lieutenant. There's a theme here. I don't have a picture of my wife in here, but she could also be in blue. There's a military theme here. Did anybody pick up on that? Okay. So if I think about my why, if my why is to really bring people into relationship with Jesus and to improve mine, why on earth would I be a military guy? Why would I be a warfighter? Yeah, so think about where we would be as a nation if we were powerless, but we'd had this amazing revival prior to 1776. You know your history. If you read Eric Metaxas, prior to 1776, before those men decided what our government was going to be, they had the most massive revival in the history of the U.S. Never been repeated. You know, does anybody know who the primary person was who drove that revival? Yeah, Whitefield. Yeah, so a guy we don't think about. George Whitefield drove that revival. And because of that revival, it led Franklin to a position that said, this is how the country can work as a republic. Okay, and so as a military person, if we're strong, how many missionaries have left the United States of America into foreign countries? Where has the export of the gospel come from, for the most part, the last 100 years? It's been the United States. If we had a strong military, how do you think it would have happened if our military was weak? And how many mission fields have been opened up because our military was strong? So I don't have a problem with my why. Okay? That's to say, if your why is correct, your how can look really different. But you have to decide how to make your how fit inside your why. Okay? If you haven't done that, then where are you going to go? What's next? You're going to be out there flailing. You have to have your how fit inside your why, because if your how fits inside your why, what will happen? What will happen? You will bring people into your why. People will come into perfect relationship with Jesus. And guess what? The types of people that will be brought into that will be brought into them because of your diversity. Can I go to, I don't know how to, I can't pick on you. You're kind of, what kind of people do you normally interface with? Troublemakers. Can I go into a trouble? Yes, I can. See, I knew that one wouldn't work. So the issue is, can I go into some of these areas as a diverse person and influence those people as well as you could? And the answer is no. Because of the diversity, the command of the disciples going out wasn't, go find as many Jewish people as you can and bring them to Christ. That was not the command in John 17. That's not what he prayed for. What did he pray for? All the world. It doesn't matter if you're green, yellow, black, purple, polka dotted. The command was all the world. And there are certain areas that I won't be effective in, that you will be, if your why is clearly stated. Next slide, please. So what is the most often used tactic to create allegiance to a political agenda? I've already said this, fear. Fear of getting something you don't want or of losing something you already have. So think about it right now. How are you voting? Don't answer. How are you voting, and why are you voting that way? Are you voting that way because your fear is of getting something you don't want, or is it fear of losing something you already have? Doesn't matter. You still are involved in this republic, but don't do it based on fear. Do it based on, this is my why, this is what I'm trying to do, this is how I'm going to do it. If you keep that in mind, do not fear, for I am with you always. What does 2 Timothy 1:7 say? Somebody off the top of your head. Say it loud. Yeah, you're pretty close. He didn't give us a spirit of timidity. He did not give us a spirit of timidity. So we should be bold in our positions, but should we be divisive? Okay? So for those of you that are uncomfortable right now that have had a discussion this week that's been divisive, cut it out. Because Jesus tells you to cut it out. He tells you to cut it out, and he prays. The most important thing, as we heard these elders talk about what was the most important thing, unity was brought up. Do we set the example as a church of unity in spite of these political differences and argue? Or do we say, this is our why, there's differences in how, but they don't raise to the elevation of causing an argument? Next slide, please. Backfire effect. You've heard me talk about it. What is it? It's a cognitive quirk. If you argue with somebody that's in a core position, what will they do every time? They will defend it, they will get angry, and they will entrench themselves in their original position deeper than they were before you started. So what good does it do to argue if your goal is to bring them to a different understanding? Doesn't work. Because if you argue with them, they're worse off than if you had just left it alone. It's been proven 1,000 times. So how do you get around that? You want to bring someone to understanding your point of view. Okay, next slide. How can the backfire effect be overcome? There's a hint in the lower right-hand corner. Because we've lost this skill set. What are they doing down there? They're sitting around the fire telling stories. Okay, the most persuasive thing that you can do if you want to talk to somebody is not to argue data, is to tell stories. I saw a thing on the news the other day, and so I really appreciated the folks who were out front on the trying to get the abortion amendment or whatever that was on the ballot. That's something that I feel strongly about. I would admit that I do not understand Christians that don't support that. I don't understand that. But are they not going to heaven? They're going to heaven. They are. And so I don't understand it, but I'm not going to fight about it. Next slide. The best persuasive device is a personal story. So on this show, there was a young lady who was talking about a political event, and her comment was, the reason I'm here today is because my mom walked out of an abortion clinic. That's a pretty important personal story. That impacted me in a lot of different ways. okay? You'd sit around, instead of having these public debates, go camping, sit around a campfire. If their survival depends on everybody pulling together, you'll stop arguing, Next slide. Why unity or teamsmanship? Okay, you've seen me show this slide, but I'm going to take a different angle on it. So next bullet, how much can a draft horse pull? Next slide, about 5,000 to 8,000 pounds. Okay, horsepower is pretty good. How much can two untrained draft horses pull when they're yoked together? What's the number? 16,000, but usually around 12K. They actually lose efficiency if they're not trained. How much when they're trained to pull as a team? What's the number? About 32,000 pounds. Teamsmanship and the synergy around teamsmanship is something that God and Jesus understood around creating unity. If we don't have unity and we're pulling the opposite direction, what's the number from two horses? 0, because they're pulling exactly the opposite direction. Math is pretty simple, isn't it? 4 out of every 3 people struggle with it, okay? But here's what's so interesting that I want to share with you in this picture is, depending on how you were raised, I was raised on a farm, what's he doing with the disc right there with that horse, with those horses? He's breaking up the soil in a straight line. Anybody that was raised on a farm knows the efficiency is in a straight line. What if he takes a hard right there? Is he doing something wrong? It's not efficient. I mean, he's not doing it wrong. So, how many of you know people that are going to take a right-hand turn right there? They're going to do things differently than is the most efficient way to do it. Their how is very different than driving those horses in a straight line. And if you're used to driving horses in a straight line, you want to correct them, don't you? Stop it. As they take that hard right turn, and maybe they go in circles and, make an S-curve. But at the end of the day, they plow the field. But they just did it differently than is the most efficient way. But on that journey, as they take that hard right, would they encounter something that you might not have encountered by going in a straight line? Their why is no different. The why is we got to grow corn. Their how is very different, and the what was they grew corn. Guess what? All Christians are not the same. And we should celebrate that. We should celebrate it. Next slide. Make us one so we can influence many. Make us one so we can influence many. Next slide. Law of Christ versus your political prism. Jesus knew his followers would all be diverse, and the miracle here is that we could love in spite of that. Okay? By doing so, God's why and our why becomes a reality. That's the take-home message here. Don't get caught up in political disunity, because guess what? Next slide. Christianity shaped the Western world, not Republicans, not Democrats. We get caught up in political parties, and they don't matter. Your political party, your political candidate will win or lose based on how the republic functions in November. Okay? When that happens, accept that and drive on. Because guess what? Is what happens to your political candidate going to ultimately, in fact, impact your why? Is it going to do it? It isn't. Your why is realized based on unity, teamsmanship, and how we love in the face of this diversity. How many political parties have already come and gone in America? How many Federalists do we have in here today? How many Whigs do we have? How many Bold Party people do we have? They come and go. They're temporal. They don't matter. Not in the grand scheme of things. That doesn't excuse us from being participants in our republic, but it does excuse us from getting all wound up about this crap, okay? Next slide. What do we do? How do we do it? Do not permit division to form by following a far lesser ruler than our eternal Savior. Do not get caught up in this. Don't argue. It's only going to backfire. Okay? Do not shy away from being actively engaged. Sign that petition if that's where your position is. What is the law of Christ? Based on John 13. What is the law of Christ? What did he give us as his new law? To love one another. If love is the basis of that decision point, then we can work through all of this stuff. Fight for and pray as Christ did for unity. And again, if we're going to get people to our side of it, we have to be able to tell an effective story. I don't mean make one up. I mean live a story worth telling. You sit down with someone around a campfire and tell a story about your life and it's attractive to that person, are they more or less likely to understand or come to your point of view? They're more likely. If you give them a bunch of data points, what are they going to do? They're going to go to sleep. It's boring. I don't like it either. Okay? So live a story worth telling. And this idea of love. So let's think about this before I wrap this up. You know, I like your definition of what love is. So love is living for the good of another. Is that good enough paraphrase? There are gradations of that. What happens in the highest form of love? Yeah, so it goes from I'm willing to live for you to I'm willing to die for you. Love is most highly manifested when it's not just living for that person. And honestly, when you think about it, I think a person's life is more enriched by having more people you're willing to die for. Let me think about this for a second. Ski, if someone in here needed a blood transfusion and you matched up, would you give it? Okay. So Aaron, now there's somebody in here that needs a kidney. You got an extra one. So a lot of us, I would fall in the same place. Now, Aaron, somebody in here needs a heart. Pray for him. Now think back, ask yourself, how many people in your life, if you knew they needed a heart, you wouldn't even blink? I got a whole list of folks. Those boys, my wife, my grandchildren. If I could make that happen so that I could give them more life, I would do it in a heartbeat. And my life is richer because of that understanding. You know, as a war fighter, that became clear to me. So on D-Day, what happened on D-Day? When those guys went into Normandy, did they do it because they loved the United States? That didn't have anything to do with, I love the United States. You know, what it had to do with is I got a bunch of my buddies that we're all crossing that river together, we're crossing that beach together, and we know a bunch of us aren't coming back. What drove them across that beach? Didn't have anything to do with patriotism, my friend. I've lived it. It had everything to do with the guy standing next to him. When you understand that degree of love where you're willing to die for someone, man, does it change your life. Because what was the ultimate, when you think about what the message has been, what we've really talked about this morning, who exemplified that? Yeah, I mean, he didn't even blink. He didn't even know you were born. He was praying for you before you were born, and he was willing to die a really terrible death. And he prayed for one thing. What did he pray for? Unity. Can we not wrap our arms around this idea? We don't need to be arguing about political crap. we need to be thinking about our why and how to bring more and more people into this discussion, understanding that that diversity is going to create some very interesting discussions. It's okay. It's okay to have those discussions if you keep your why at the center. How you do that is not that important. You know, I grew up in a church where we got ready for baccalaureate. Does everybody know what baccalaureate is? And it's a real small town, and the minister said, I'm not going to do baccalaureate this year because the Catholics are there. Made a big deal. Church all supported him. Right answer? Yeah, so wrong, it's ridiculous. Okay, that's where getting caught up in those sorts of legalities doesn't bring anybody to your why. It breaks things down. Last slide. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. What's the rock? Yeah. Jesus. What is the law of Jesus? What was his final prayer? Does it get any simpler than that? Does it really get any simpler than that? So as we have these discussions from entertainment venues about what the news is and what's going on, you just go, how's it fit into my why? How's it fit into my why? Because if it doesn't fit into your why, it doesn't matter. It's temporal. One or the other of them could be gone tomorrow. Doesn't matter.